There are countless worlds within the Imperium of Man, and on every one of them, there are levels so deep and forgotten that even the Emperor's light does not reach. Places where the sky is a rumor passed down like myth, where the air tastes of rust and chemicals, and where the concept of tomorrow holds no promise, only repetition. This is where the Imperium's poor live. Not the struggling, not the unfortunate, but the deliberately condemned. The billions whose existence is necessary, yet whose lives are considered expendable. The Imperium tells a story about itself. It speaks of unity, of faith, of humanity standing defiant against an uncaring galaxy. It tells its citizens that sacrifice is noble, that suffering is holy, and that obedience is salvation. From the spires of hive cities and the pulpits of cathedral worlds, this story is repeated endlessly, until it becomes truth through sheer exhaustion. But far below those spires, beneath the marble halls, beneath the banners and statues, beneath the administrative levels and manufactorum floors, there exists another reality. One the Imperium rarely acknowledges, yet utterly depends upon. In these lower depths, life is not lived. It is consumed. To be born into the poor levels of the Imperium is to inherit a sentence without a trial. There is no announcement, no declaration of fate, because none is required. Your destiny is already understood. You will work, you will endure, and when your body fails, as all bodies eventually do, you will be replaced without ceremony. Not out of cruelty, not out of malice, but out of efficiency. The Imperium does not hate its poor. Hatred requires recognition. Instead, it simply calculates them. The first sound many hear upon entering the world is not a mother's voice, but the grinding hum of ancient machinery. Generators older than memory. Ventilation systems clogged with centuries of neglect. The constant, omnipresent thrum of industry that never sleeps, never pauses, and never cares. This sound becomes the heartbeat of existence itself, so constant that silence, if it ever comes, feels wrong, like a warning rather than a comfort. There is no ceremony for birth here. No records carefully kept. Some are given names, many are not. A designation, a number, a mark on a slate, these are enough. The Imperium does not need to know who you are. Only what you can do, and how long you can do it for. From the very beginning, survival is not guaranteed. Disease, malnutrition, toxic air, and contaminated water claim countless infants before they ever understand fear. Their absence is not mourned. Their loss is not logged. They are simply adjusted for in production quotas. Those who survive childhood learn the most important lesson of all long before they can read or write. Hope is dangerous. Hope invites disappointment. Hope encourages questions. And questions, in the Imperium, are far more lethal than ignorance. So the poor levels teach a quieter doctrine, one not written in any holy text, but etched into bone and memory. Endure what you are given. Do not imagine what you are not meant to have. Above them, far above, the Imperium appears glorious. The faithful speak of hive spires that pierce the clouds, of officers clad in gold and crimson, of banners carried into battle beneath 1,000 stars. But for those born below, these things may as well be stories of another universe entirely. The Imperium is not a shining empire. It is a ceiling that never opens. A weight that never lifts. A system so vast that it no longer remembers the individuals it crushes to remain standing. And yet, this suffering is not hidden because it is shameful. It is hidden because it is ordinary. The poor levels are not a failure of imperial governance. They are its foundation. Every lasgun forged, every void ship launched, every regiment deployed to die screaming on distant worlds. None of it happens without the endless labor of those who will never be thanked for it. The Imperium does not collapse under the weight of its misery because it has learned to distribute that misery so evenly, so thoroughly, that rebellion becomes a logistical impossibility. When survival consumes every waking moment, resistance becomes a luxury no one can afford. From the outside, the Imperium is a fortress against extinction. From the inside, especially here, It is a machine fueled by human lives, ground down day by day, generation by generation. And the cruelest truth of all is not that this system exists, but that it works. Humanity survives precisely because billions are allowed to suffer without voice, without choice, and without escape. This is life inside the Imperium's poor levels. Not a tragedy, not an accident, but a design so ancient and so entrenched that no one alive remembers a time before it. And once you are born here, the question is no longer whether you will suffer. Only how long you can endure before the darkness finally claims you. Before we descend deeper into the machinery, the hunger, and the rot, understand this: if you stay with this story until the very end, you will come away with something rare in Warhammer 40,000 lore, an understanding not of heroes or gods, but of the billions who make the Imperium possible, and the terrible reason it can never truly save them. What you're about to hear is not about war. It's about what comes before war ever begins. Because life in the Imperium's poor levels does not start with choice. It starts with inheritance. The place of your birth decides everything. Not just your work, or your chances of survival, but how much pain the Imperium considers acceptable for you to endure. The poor levels are not uniform. They exist across hive worlds, forge worlds, agri-world processing zones, void ships, and orbital stations. But no matter where they are found, they all share the same purpose: to house vast numbers of human beings as cheaply, densely, and efficiently as possible. Comfort is waste. Space is luxury. Safety is optional. Here, architecture is not designed for living, it is designed for containment. Corridors narrow until two people can barely pass. Hab-blocks stack endlessly atop one another, patched together with scrap, rust, and prayers that go unanswered. Walls sweat with condensation and chemical residue. Pipes leak things no one can name anymore. The air is thick, recycled so many times that breathing feels like borrowing oxygen from the dead. And in many places, that's exactly what it is. Most residents never learn the true size of the city they live in. They move through the same routes every day: habitation to work sector back to habitation, until the world becomes a loop with no edges. Some live their entire lives within a few kilometers, never knowing what lies beyond the next sealed bulkhead or security gate. Curiosity fades quickly when it is punished. Exploration ends the first time someone doesn't come back. From an early age, people learn that attention is dangerous. Being noticed by overseers, enforcers, or officials rarely brings reward. It brings reassignment, punishment, or disappearance. So the poor learn to exist quietly, to keep their heads down, to become part of the background noise of industry. In the Imperium, invisibility is not just survival, it is the highest form of success most will ever achieve. And yet, even here, the Imperium's ideology is present. Shrines built into crumbling walls. Faded aquillas painted over corrosion. Voxcasters endlessly repeating sermons about duty, sacrifice, and the divine will of the Emperor. These messages are not meant to inspire. They are meant to explain suffering, to give it meaning so no one questions why it exists. You are not hungry because the system failed you. You are hungry because this is your sacred role in humanity's survival. This is how the Imperium maintains control without constant force. It teaches people that their pain is not a problem to be solved, but a burden to be carried with pride. And over generations, this belief becomes instinct. Parents pass it to children not because they believe it, but because believing anything else would break them. What makes the poor levels truly horrifying is not the violence or the filth. It is the normalization of despair. When disease spreads, it is expected. When people vanish, it is assumed. When someone collapses at their workstation and is dragged away, production continues without pause. Life does not stop for death here. It barely acknowledges it. And still, the Imperium calls this survival. So as we move forward, remember this truth. Everything that follows, the labor, the faith, the punishment, the monsters both human and otherwise, grows from this foundation. A population conditioned not to dream, not to rebel, not to ask why. A population that has learned to mistake endurance for virtue. This is only the beginning. For those born into the Imperium's poor levels, childhood is not a protected stage of life. It is not a time of learning, discovery, or innocence. It is a brief and brutal proving ground. Those who adapt survive. Those who don't simply vanish, absorbed into the statistics of loss that the Imperium quietly expects. From the moment a child can walk, the world begins shaping them for labor, endurance, and obedience. There is no pause between being alive and being useful. Children grow up surrounded by danger so constant that it fades into the background. Exposed wiring sparks in dark corridors. Walkways crumble without warning. Machinery operates without safeguards because installing them would slow production. Injuries are common, and fear becomes a reflex rather than an emotion. Crying is discouraged, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Noise attracts attention, and attention brings consequences no one can afford. Education, where it exists at all, is utilitarian to the extreme. Children are taught numbers only insofar as they relate to quotas and rationing. Letters are learned only if their future labor requires them. History is simplified into doctrine. The emperor protects, humanity endures, obedience is survival. Questions beyond this are unnecessary and dangerous. Curiosity is not encouraged because curiosity leads to dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction leads to instability. Most learning happens through observation. Children watch their elders work until exhaustion bends their bodies into permanent shapes. They learn which overseers punish without warning, which corridors are safest to sleep in, which scraps of food won't immediately make them sick. They learn to recognize the sound of boots that mean enforcement rather than inspection. They learn when to speak, when to remain silent, and when silence will not save them anyway. Play, as it exists elsewhere in the Imperium, is nearly unknown here. What passes for play is often training in disguise, mock fights that prepare them for gang violence, scavenging games that teach them how to find value in waste, contests of endurance that reward pain tolerance rather than skill. Even laughter carries an edge, because joy feels temporary and unsafe, something that could be taken away at any moment. Family structures are fragile. Parents work long shifts, sometimes staggered so completely that they barely see their children awake. Some never return at all, claimed by industrial accidents, disease, or quiet. Punishment. Children learn early not to ask where someone has gone. The absence itself is the answer. In many cases, older siblings raise the younger ones, passing down habits of caution and resignation instead of comfort. By adolescence, most children already know where they will end up. Not because they were told, but because the system has shown them. The strongest are marked for heavy labor. The quick are noticed by gangs or recruiters. The unlucky are filtered into the most hazardous roles, where life expectancy is measured in months rather than years. Choice is an illusion maintained only by ignorance, and ignorance does not last long in the poor levels. What is most tragic is not that children suffer here, but that they come to believe this is normal. That somewhere, this is how life is supposed to be lived. They do not imagine a future because no one around them ever speaks of one. Dreams fade not because they are crushed, but because they are never allowed to form. By the time a child becomes an adult in the Imperium's poor levels, something vital has already been stripped away. Not their strength, not their will to survive, but their belief that survival should mean anything more than continuing to breathe. And once that belief is gone, the Imperium can shape them into whatever it needs next. In the Imperium's poor levels, time is not measured by sunrise or sunset. Most have never seen either. Instead, time is defined by alarms, shift bells, and the slow deterioration of the body. Days blur together until memory loses its edges. Weeks pass unnoticed. Years are marked only by how much weaker your hands have become, how shallow your breathing is, how long the pain lingers after work is done. The concept of a day holds little meaning when the environment never changes. Artificial lights flicker constantly, sometimes dim, sometimes blinding, often failing entirely. In some sectors, darkness is permanent, broken only by emergency lumens or the glow of industrial furnaces. In others, harsh illumination burns endlessly, denying rest and confusing the body until sleep becomes a battle against exhaustion rather than a relief from it. Work dictates everything. Schedules are not suggestions, they are commands. When the sirens sound, bodies move. Not because people are eager, but because the consequences of delay are immediate and brutal. Overseers do not need to shout. The system itself enforces compliance through hunger, punishment, and fear. Miss enough shifts, and your ration allocation changes. Miss too many, and you are reassigned, or removed entirely. The labor itself is monotonous and relentless. Repetitive motions performed thousands of times a day until muscles tear and joints grind down. Maintenance performed on machines so old and unstable that failure is expected. Cleaning waste systems where toxic runoff burns skin and lungs alike. There is no pride in the work, only endurance. The Imperium does not require passion. It requires output. Breaks are brief and functional. Enough time to consume rations, to hydrate with recycled water that tastes faintly metallic, and to rest just enough to continue. Conversation during these moments is muted. People conserve energy, words, and emotion. Complaints change nothing. Silence at least avoids notice. Sleep is rarely peaceful. Habitation spaces are overcrowded, shared with strangers, family, and the ever-present sounds of industry. Machinery groans through the walls. Pipes bang and hiss. Sirens cut through rest at random intervals. Dreams, when they come, are often worse than waking life, fractured images of falling, suffocating, or being chased through endless corridors. What erodes people fastest is not the labor, but the repetition. The knowledge that tomorrow will be exactly the same as today, and the day after that will be the same again. There are no milestones to look forward to. No holidays. No personal achievements worth recognizing. Life becomes a narrow tunnel with no visible exit, and eventually, even the desire for one begins to fade. This is how the Imperium extracts obedience without chains. When time loses meaning, resistance feels pointless. When the future holds no variation, rebellion feels absurd. People stop asking when things will improve, because experience has taught them that they won't. And so they endure, not because they believe in the Imperium's ideals, but because endurance is the only skill the poor levels ever truly teach. In the poor levels of the Imperium, belief is not optional. It is enforced, repeated, and absorbed through sheer exposure. Shrines are built into walls that are barely holding together. Icons of the Emperor stare down from rusted alcoves, their features worn smooth by time, pollution, and desperate hands. Candles burn with recycled fats. Incense masks the smell of decay. Faith here is not beautiful, and it is not gentle. It is functional. The Imperial Creed is taught early, not as philosophy, but as fact. The Emperor protects. Humanity must endure. Sacrifice is sacred. These words are spoken so often that they lose meaning, becoming background noise woven into daily life. They are not meant to inspire hope. They are meant to answer questions before they are ever asked. Why are you hungry? Why do you suffer? Why must you obey? Because this is your role in the survival of mankind. For many, faith is less belief and more habit. People bow their heads not because they expect salvation, but because failing to do so draws attention. Attendance at sermons is recorded. Devotion is observed. A lack of enthusiasm is noticed. In a society where being noticed is dangerous, piety becomes another survival skill. Even those who privately doubt still whisper prayers, because disbelief offers no protection. The Emperor, to the poor, is not a living God of glory and triumph. He is distant, silent, and abstract. A symbol rather than a presence. They are told he watches over them, yet nothing ever improves. Over time, many come to believe that this silence is itself a test, that enduring without reward is the highest form of devotion. And so they learn to equate suffering with virtue, pain with purpose. Religious officials in the poor levels rarely speak of mercy. Their sermons focus on duty, obedience, and vigilance against heresy. They warn that questioning the system is a sin, that discontent invites corruption, that chaos preys on the weak-minded and the dissatisfied. In this way, faith becomes another tool of control, one that turns frustration inward, transforming it into guilt rather than rebellion. Fear is never far from worship. Tales of damnation, possession, and mutation are shared freely, especially among children. The galaxy is described as a place of endless horror, and the Imperium, no matter how cruel, is portrayed as the only shield against extinction. The message is clear: things could always be worse. Compared to annihilation, your suffering is acceptable. And yet, in quiet moments, faith takes on a different shape. Some pray not for deliverance, but for endurance. Not for change, but for numbness. A few whisper desperate hopes into the darkness, not that their lives will improve, but that their deaths will be quick, or that their children might suffer slightly less. These prayers are never answered, but they are still spoken. Because silence without prayer feels heavier than silence with it. This is the role of religion in the Imperium's poor levels. Not to save souls, but to stabilize them. To give suffering a narrative so complete that it becomes indistinguishable from reality. When pain has meaning, it can be endured. And as long as it can be endured, the system does not need to change. Thus, faith persists, not as light in the darkness, but as a reason the darkness is allowed to remain. In the Imperium's poor levels, law does not exist to protect. It exists to maintain output. Order is enforced not through fairness, but through fear, visibility, and swift punishment. The distinction between criminal and citizen is thin here, because most crimes were simply acts of desperation: stealing food, skipping a shift due to injury, speaking too loudly in the wrong place. Intent is irrelevant. Context is ignored. Only disruption matters. Enforcers and arbitrators are not omnipresent, but they do not need to be. Their power lies in unpredictability. They appear without warning, descend into hab sectors or work floors, and make examples quickly. Public punishment is preferred, not because it is more effective, but because it is more memorable. A single beating witnessed by hundreds saves the Imperium the effort of enforcing rules individually. There are no trials in any meaningful sense. Guilt is assumed the moment someone is detained. Evidence is minimal. Testimony is unnecessary. The system does not care whether someone intended to cause harm, only whether harm to productivity occurred. A missing worker is a loss. A disruptive worker is a liability. Both are dealt with decisively. Punishments vary, but all share the same purpose: deterrence. Fines are meaningless when people already have nothing. Imprisonment removes labor, so penalties often take the form of forced reassignment. Hazardous duties, penal work details, zones with radiation leaks, unstable machinery, or exposure to toxic waste. Survival rates are low, and everyone knows it. This knowledge alone keeps most in line. Death, when it comes through enforcement, is rarely dramatic. It is efficient. A body removed, a record adjusted, a replacement assigned. Life in the poor levels is so fragile that violence feels almost redundant. The environment itself does most of the killing. Enforcement merely accelerates what was already inevitable. What makes rebellion rare is not loyalty, but exhaustion. Organizing resistance requires time, trust, and energy. None of these are abundant. Informants are common, often motivated by the promise of extra rations or temporary protection. Betrayal is not seen as evil, it is seen as survival. Even the idea of uprising feels abstract when tomorrow's meal is uncertain. And yet, beneath the surface, resentment simmers. Not as rage, but as quiet bitterness. People learn to hate the system without naming it. They curse overseers under their breath. They avoid shrines when they can. They share forbidden stories in whispers, Tales of better worlds, of revolts crushed, of freedoms that may never have existed at all. These moments are small, fragile, and easily extinguished. The Imperium understands this balance well. It allows just enough pressure to keep production high, but never so much that collapse becomes imminent. When conditions worsen too quickly, concessions are made, not out of mercy, but calculation. A slight increase in rations. A temporary reduction in shifts. Just enough to prevent unrest from becoming organized. This is not justice. It is management. And for those trapped in the poor levels, it sends a clear message. You are not punished because you are evil. You are punished because you are replaceable. Beneath the regulated misery of the poor levels lie places even the Imperium hesitates to acknowledge. Zones where infrastructure has collapsed entirely. Where oversight is minimal or non-existent. Where the machine still demands output, but no longer bothers to pretend it cares how that output is achieved. These are the deepest layers, the underhives, the forgotten decks, the sealed sectors quietly reopened out of desperation. And here, life becomes something far more dangerous than mere poverty. In these depths, law dissolves into hierarchy. Power is claimed, not granted. Gangs form not out of ambition, but necessity. Protection has value, and violence is the currency used to buy it. Control over water sources, scrap routes, or food caches determines who lives comfortably and who starves slowly. Loyalty is temporary. Strength is respected only until someone stronger arrives. Children are absorbed into these structures early. Some are recruited, others are forced. A few volunteer, believing, often correctly, that this path offers better odds than sanctioned labor. Gangs provide what the Imperium does not, a sense of belonging, identity, and immediate reward. The cost is constant risk and moral erosion, but in the poor levels, those are already guaranteed. Mutation is more common here, the result of radiation leaks, chemical runoff, and generational exposure to pollutants. Extra limbs, malformed features, unstable physiology, signs the Imperium views as heretical. Mutants are hunted, hidden, or exploited. Some gangs protect them for their usefulness. Others kill them to avoid attention. Few mutants survive long enough to grow old. These zones are also fertile ground for things far worse than crime. Desperation attracts whispers. Promises of power, safety, or meaning echo through the darkness. Chaos cults take root quietly, offering what the Imperium never does, answers that feel personal. The faithful poor are warned endlessly about heresy, yet the conditions that breed it are never addressed. Suppression comes only after corruption has already spread. The Imperium responds to these threats with purges. Entire sectors are sealed, flooded with toxins, or burned clean. Officially, these places never existed. The people who live there are erased along with the problem. Production elsewhere increases to compensate. Life goes on. What makes these depths truly horrifying is not that monsters live there, but that they are created by necessity. Violence, fanaticism, and corruption are not anomalies. They are adaptations. When the system offers no protection, people become their own defense. When hope is absent, any promise, no matter how dark, feels worth listening to. And so the poor levels feed not only the Imperium's factories, but its nightmares. From these forgotten depths rise the very threats the Imperium claims to fight. A cycle of suffering so complete that it sustains itself. Down here, humanity survives, but it does not remain whole. For those trapped in the Imperium's poor levels, escape is a word spoken rarely and always with caution. Not because it is forbidden, but because it is cruel. To speak of escape is to acknowledge a life beyond suffering, and that idea alone can be dangerous. Yet the Imperium occasionally offers something that looks like a way out. Not freedom, not salvation, but reassignment. Recruitment drives descend into the lower levels without warning. Notices are broadcast over Vox systems. Names are pulled from work rosters. Bodies are assessed quickly and impersonally. The Astra Militarum, Void Crews, Penal Legions, each represents a different path away from the depths. All are lethal in their own way. But to many, they still feel preferable to the certainty of decay. To serve is framed as honor, as a chance to rise above one's station. In truth, it is simply another form of consumption. The Imperium does not recruit the poor because it believes in them. It recruits them because they are abundant, conditioned to obedience, and already considered expendable. A life spent in the underhive has prepared them perfectly for war. Long hours, minimal comfort, constant danger, and the expectation that death is normal. Those who leave rarely understand what they are trading. They imagine open skies, distant stars, and the possibility, however slim, of survival beyond the poor levels. What they find instead is discipline enforced at gunpoint, training that breaks bodies already worn thin, and battlefields where life expectancy is measured in minutes. The galaxy beyond the hive is vast, but it is no kinder. Very few return. Those who do are changed. Some come back broken, unable to reintegrate into the rigid misery they once knew. Others return only as stories, rumors of someone who got out, inflated with myth because the truth is too bleak. Survival off-world does not mean freedom. It simply means serving somewhere else until death catches up. For every one who escapes the poor levels through service, millions remain. The system does not improve because individuals leave. It adjusts. New workers take their place. New children are born into the same darkness. The cycle continues uninterrupted. This is the Imperium's greatest deception, the illusion of mobility. The belief that suffering is temporary, that loyalty might be rewarded, that sacrifice could lead to something better. In reality, the system cannot afford to save everyone. It can barely afford to save anyone at all. And so escape remains rare, dangerous, and ultimately meaningless on a larger scale. The Imperium endures not because people leave the poor levels, but because most never will. For them, this is where life begins. And where it ends. The Imperium's poor levels are not a mistake. They are not a flaw in governance, nor an unintended consequence of overpopulation or industrial ambition. They exist precisely because humanity's survival requires them. Every last gun forged, every munition produced, every regiment sent to fight on distant worlds is made possible by the sweat, pain, and quiet endurance of billions who will never leave these depths. The galaxy above relies on the suffering below, and the system is careful to ensure that the flow never stops. It is a truth both simple and horrifying. The Imperium cannot survive without the poor levels. The countless lives spent in filth and hunger, the children who learn obedience before hope, the workers who endure injury and illness without complaint, these are not casualties of progress. They are the foundation of it. Billions must suffer so that the few who wield power, command armies, and sit in distant spires can continue to survive and expand. And this system is deliberate. Every harsh rule, every punishment, every rationed meal is part of a balance that has existed for centuries. People are expendable not because the Imperium is cruel, but because it is efficient. The underhive does not exist to cultivate prosperity. It exists to ensure production, to guarantee obedience, to maintain humanity in numbers, even if it cannot maintain humanity in dignity. Most of the residents never realize this. To them, life is simply the daily struggle: work, survive, obey, repeat. They learn the pattern early and adapt, because to question it is to invite disaster. Rare glimpses of the wider Imperium, towering spires, space-bound ships, proclamations of glory, feel distant and abstract, like stories about gods who are real but do not intervene. Few see themselves as part of a system. Most see themselves only as survivors. Even the small acts of defiance, the whispered rebellions and fleeting dreams of escape, cannot alter the truth. The Imperium's machinery is vast beyond comprehension, its need for human labor infinite. For every one person who rises or escapes, countless others take their place. The poor levels are eternal, self-reinforcing, and unavoidable. It is in this understanding that despair finds its final form. The very system that claims to protect humanity ensures that the majority will never experience anything beyond endurance. And yet, paradoxically, it is this endurance that has allowed humanity to survive for tens of thousands of years, across countless wars and catastrophes, against foes both mortal and cosmic. The Imperium thrives because it has learned to trade billions of lives for the continuation of the species, and most of those lives will never know it. This is the Imperium's greatest secret, the one that sustains the galaxy while remaining invisible to those who suffer most. It is a truth both inescapable and absolute. Without the poor levels, there would be no Imperium at all. And once you understand that, the final, most terrifying question remains: if this is the cost of survival, is humanity truly worth saving? In the Imperium's poor levels, death comes quietly, without ceremony, without recognition, and often without notice. Workers collapse from exhaustion at their stations. Children fall ill from contaminated water or spoiled rations. Accidents claim limbs, eyes, or lives entirely. And while the rest continue their labor, production does not pause. There are no funerals. There are no memorials. Names are rarely recorded, because no one expects to remember them anyway. Death here is just another part of the system, a natural, if unpleasant, rhythm in a life that is otherwise defined by survival. Yet in this inevitability lies a peculiar sort of mercy. For those who have endured decades in the darkness, a final release can be a quiet relief. Some pray for it. Some silently hope for injury or illness to claim them, because continuing to endure is often more painful than the unknown beyond life. Death, when it comes, ends hunger, exhaustion, and fear. It is the one certainty that the Imperium cannot deny. Even so, the poor levels are designed to minimize this mercy. Disease is widespread, but slow. Injury is common, but rarely fatal immediately. The Imperium ensures that survival, even when suffering is extreme, is the default. Bodies must work until they can no longer, because the system cannot allow even the dead to exist outside its control for long. Replacement workers are ready. Production quotas must be met. Survival is not rewarded, but demanded. This creates a strange psychology among the inhabitants. People learn not to mourn. They learn not to hope. They learn to measure life not in years, but in endurance. Every day survived is a small victory, even if it brings no comfort. Every meal scavenged, every shift completed, every breath drawn is an act of defiance against the system, even if the system itself is indifferent to it. And yet, the knowledge of their expendability hangs over them constantly. Every injury, every illness, every death reinforces the same lesson: you are replaceable. Your suffering is expected. Your absence is already accounted for. Individual lives have little meaning beyond their utility, and most residents internalize this fact long before adulthood. This is the final, unavoidable truth of the poor levels. Life is not precious here. Survival is not celebrated. Death is not mourned. And the system continues, unbroken, indifferent, and eternal. Here, humanity endures, not with hope, not with joy, not with dignity, but with quiet, relentless persistence. And in the depths of this endurance, the Imperium ensures its own survival, one suffering life at a time. In the Imperium's poor levels, escape, true escape, is exceptionally rare. Most inhabitants are conditioned from birth to accept their place, to obey without question, and to endure without expectation. Yet the Imperium occasionally offers the illusion of opportunity, framed as a reward for loyalty or skill. Recruitment drives pull names from work rosters. Notices are broadcast over Vox systems. Promises of service in the Astra Militarum, the penal legions, or void crews suggest a chance to leave the filth, hunger, and endless labor behind. But these are not chances at freedom. They are trade-offs, often exchanging one form of hell for another. Those who leave face training that will break their bodies, discipline enforced at gunpoint, and combat that will test the limits of human endurance. Life off-world is not liberation, it is merely another method of consumption. The Imperium does not save these recruits. It uses them. Survival is measured not by well-being, but by productivity and obedience under fire. For the lucky few who endure the horrors of war or space service and return to the hive, reintegration is almost impossible. They are no longer like the others, yet neither are they truly free. Their stories become warnings or myths whispered to the next generation, that leaving may bring temporary reprieve, but it rarely changes the system. Most never return at all, claimed by combat, disease, or accident, their absence quietly absorbed into the endless calculations of the Imperium. This creates a paradoxical system of hope and despair. The Imperium maintains compliance not only through fear and oppression, but through the occasional, tantalizing illusion of upward mobility. Those who remain see the possibility of escape in others, reinforcing the narrative that suffering can be temporary, but they also witness the near certainty of death, failure, or brokenness for those who attempt it. Hope, in the poor levels, is both a tool and a trap. And yet, even the smallest spark of possibility can influence behavior. Children watch older siblings leave for service. Workers notice when someone is selected for reassignment. Rumors circulate of distant worlds, of glory and pay, of reprieve from the never-ending darkness. These glimpses keep the majority compliant. They endure because someday, perhaps, their suffering might end, even if experience proves otherwise. In truth, the Imperium relies on this illusion more than most citizens realize. It is the promise that keeps people moving, keeps production running, and ensures that billions continue to suffer without revolt. The system's efficiency depends not only on pain and fear, but also on the faint, unreachable promise of something better, a promise carefully calibrated to sustain obedience without ever truly fulfilling it. And so the cycle continues. Generation after generation is born into darkness, trained in endurance, and offered a hope that rarely delivers. The poor levels endure, and the Imperium survives, perfectly balanced on the suffering of those who will never see the stars. The Imperium's poor levels are eternal, self-sustaining, and unyielding. They exist not by accident, but by deliberate design. Every ration, every shift, every punishment, every whispered prayer, all are components in a vast system that keeps humanity alive at an unfathomable cost. The people who inhabit these depths are not failures. They are the foundation upon which the Imperium itself stands. Without their endurance, their labor, and their suffering, the entire structure above would crumble. The shining spires, the armies, the fleets, all of it depends on the unseen billions who never touch glory, never draw a breath outside the shadows, and never have the luxury of hope. It is a system that is both horrifying and undeniably effective. The poor levels ensure survival, but at a price. Life is measured in output, morality is optional, and individuality is irrelevant. The Imperium does not fail because it is weak. It survives because it is cruelly efficient, using suffering as fuel, obedience as a lubricant, and the expendable as the machinery's foundation. Billions live, and die, without notice, yet humanity continues. In the end, the people of the poor levels are both invisible and essential.